Are you tired of manually walking Windows devices through all the initial first run setup steps? What if I told you there's a way you can automate the entire process using just a USB drive? In this video, I'll show you how to do it step by step. Today, I'm excited to be kicking off part 2 of my 3-part series on how to automate the Windows out-of-box experience using a provisioning package. For those that aren't familiar with provisioning packages, I'd recommend hitting pause and checking out part 1 of this series where I go over them in detail. In short, a provisioning package is a file that you install on a Windows machine, and you can use them to automate initial setup and customize local settings on a system. For this video, I'll be walking through how to configure and build a provisioning package from start to finish. And then at the very end, we'll install it on a machine so you can see what the installation process looks like. So the first thing we'll need is a Microsoft app called Windows Configuration Designer, which can be installed from the Microsoft Store or through the Windows ADK. When you first open Configuration Designer, you'll see a number of different device-specific templates you can choose from. I'll choose the one called Provision Desktop Devices. Here I'll name the project and then click Finish. All right, so what we're looking at now is called the Simple Editor, and I'll use this to configure a few of our settings, starting with the device name. I'll set this to use Contoso, followed by a hyphen, and then 10 randomly generated characters. On the Setup Network page, you can add the SSID and password for a WPA2 personal network, but I'm going to skip this as I'll be using the advanced editor later to add my network profiles. Clicking on Account Management, I'll configure the device to join Entra ID using a bulk enrollment token. So I'll select Enroll in Azure AD, and then toggle on Refresh AAD Credentials. If you'd like, you can change the bulk token expiration period, which defaults to 180 days, and then select Get Bulk Token. After signing in with an account that has permissions to enroll devices into your tenant, you can optionally uncheck this box to allow management of this device, but make sure you select the option to sign in to this app only at the bottom left. Now let's move over to the advanced editor, where I'll show you how to add certificates, network profiles, and run commands and scripts within the package. Click the button at the bottom left called Switch to Advanced Editor. You'll see a prompt appear telling us we won't be able to switch back to the simple editor once moving over, where I'll click Yes. To start with adding certificates, drop down the Runtime Settings menu and then select Certificates. I'll add my root certificate by clicking on Root Certificates, and then in the middle here, I'll name this, which can be anything, and then click Add. Back over in the Runtime Settings, drop down these, then in the middle, click Browse and locate the root certificate. The process for adding an intermediate certificate is the same, except you need to add it under the CA Certificates option, which I'll fast forward through. Now for client certs, select the Client Certificate Runtime setting, where we'll again name it and add the path to the certificate. Then select Certificate Password and enter its password. Lastly, click on Key Location, which in this case I'll set to Software Only. To add a wireless network profile, select the Runtime setting, Connectivity Profiles, WLAN, and then Profiles. Hit the Browse button and then navigate to the XML file. And don't forget to click the Add button. Now for adding a wired network profile, I discovered there's no option within the runtime settings to add these natively like we could with the wireless profile. But I found a workaround using the provisioning command settings, which allow our package to run commands and scripts on the machine we're provisioning. To get this to work, we need to run 3 separate commands. First, turn on the wired autoconfig service, as it's off by default. We'll also need to set the wired autoconfig service to run automatically when Windows starts. Then, add the wired network profile. Alright, so let's add our commands by scrolling down and selecting Provisioning Commands. Then open Primary Context and choose Command. I'll go ahead and name and add each of the 3 commands, and then we'll configure them afterwards. For this first one, I'll name it Run Wired Service, and then hit the Enter key to add it. Follow the same steps to add the second command, which I'll name Auto Start Wired Service. And for the last one, I'll call it Add Wired Network Profile. While I'm here, I'm going to add the fourth command, which I'll use to run the PowerShell script. I'll touch on that a bit more later, so for now I'll name it Install Package Entra ID. Now that our commands have been created, let's configure them. So over on the left, drop down Run Wired Service, and then open Command Line. Type in this command to turn on the wired autoconfig service. Looking at the second command called Auto Start Wired Service, enter this command to set the wired autoconfig service to run automatically when Windows starts. Opening the command named Add Wired Network Profile, click the Command File option, and then browse to the wired XML network profile so it's included in our package. Then click on Command Line and enter the command to add the wired network profile to the machine, and then the name of your XML profile. To quickly explain what we'll be configuring next, let's say you want your package to configure a device to authenticate with an 802.1x wired network, and then use that connection to Entra ID join the machine. For my testing, provisioning commands are executed during the final stages of the package's installation. This means the runtime setting that Entra ID joins the machine occurs prior to the commands that turn on the .3 service and add the wired network profile. So this device doesn't have internet access when the package attempts to Entra ID join it, so it fails. To fix this, we'll use PowerShell to Entra ID join the machine after adding the wired network profile. Here's what I've included in the PowerShell script file. All this is doing is running a command to install a separate provisioning package named Entra ID only. This separate package is one I created earlier, and it only includes the runtime setting to Entra ID join the device. So I'll open the fourth provisioning command called install package Entra ID. Then click the command file option. Now I'll browse to the location of my PowerShell script, which is called install package.ps1. Moving over to the command line option, I'll enter the PowerShell command to run the script. And as a last step, I'll click on Dependency Packages and browse to the Entra ID only package, and then click Add. Alright, so now that I've gone through everything I wanted to configure within this package, before building it, I'd recommend reviewing everything you configured to ensure something wasn't missed. Looking over at the right side of Configuration Designer, we'll focus on the Selection Customizations menu. Here under Accounts, I can confirm we're Entra ID joining the device with a bulk enrollment token. Opening certificates, I can see the intermediate, client, and root certificates are listed. Connectivity Profiles includes our wireless network profile. The Dev Details setting is where we're naming the PC. And something to point out, this hide OOBE runtime setting is always added by Configuration Designer. And this is the key runtime setting to fully automate initial setup. If you leave this set to true, hide OOBE will suppress and skip the out-of-box initial setup prompts. When using this, know that hide OOBE also skips for Windows Setup installs day one updates, as well as initiates autopilot. So if you need either of these, you'll want to set this to false. Moving on to our last runtime settings, we have these four provisioning commands, which will enable wired 802.1x network authentication, and then Entra ID join the machine. And because we're Entra ID joining the machine using a command, I need to remove the duplicate Entra ID join setting at the top. So I'll select it and then click Remove. Okay, so now that we've finished with this package, let's go ahead and build it by selecting Export at the top and then Provisioning Package. After naming it, click Next. Here you can optionally encrypt the package with a password or sign it with a certificate. This next page asks us where we want to save the package. And on this last one, I'll click Build to create it. Then if you open the output location, you should see the newly created provisioning package within File Explorer. Let's quickly install this package on a machine so you can see how streamlined the provisioning process is. Copy the package file over to the root directory of a USB drive, and then insert that drive into a machine sitting at the out-of-box experience. Windows will then automatically install the provisioning package and apply all my custom settings to the machine. When it's finished, we're left with an Entra ID joined device that is ready for an end user to start using it. Now that we've gone over how to configure and build a provisioning package, there's still one crucial step left before you use it in production, and that's to thoroughly test it. Testing will ensure the package installs successfully, but more importantly, allows you to verify your custom configurations applied to the machine and work properly. In part 3 of this series, I'll show you how to do all this, as well as troubleshoot issues, and we'll also share some tips and best practices I've learned over the years with working with these. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you over in part 3.